Welcome to Nightlight. Step away from the mainstream and gather around as we enlighten the world and our realities and travel this cosmic journey we call life. Join us as we share with you and provide that beacon that can guide us all to a better way. Explore with us as we examine a metaphysical montage of spiritual insights, covering everything from the mundane to the magical, UFOs to unicorns, and everything in between. This is a time of awakening, of sharing and evolving, of spreading our wings and soaring on the cosmic breath of creation. Come and join with other light-minded spirits as we weave our lights together to seek understanding, enlightenment, and, with a little luck, some wisdom. This is Nightlight, a reminder that you are never alone.
Welcome to a special Saturday night broadcast of Nightlight Part 2. Now, so far this month, Reverend Bill McDonald gave us a seasonal uplifting story and his metaphysical observations from his travels throughout India. Michael Falzarana gave us the sounds of a Grateful Dead Christmas last week. Tonight we'll be looking at how the ancients held ceremonies at the same time of the year, long before the sudden appearance of steel monoliths. Dennis Stone, owner of America's Stonehenge, is our guest to give us updates about his property and new insights into America's ancient ceremonial landscape. You can learn more about this enigmatic archaeological site by going to StonehengeUSA.com. Hi, Dennis. How are you?
Well, good evening, Mark. Doing pretty well. I'm excited to be on your show tonight.
Glad you're here. Now let's start off with, we're getting pretty close to the Winter Solstice, which is this Monday. With the people will be able to visit Monday, but it's also a 50th anniversary for your family's first observation of the Winter Solstice sunrise. Can you tell us a little bit about that experience and what it meant to you?
Well, yeah. It's been part of my family pretty much my whole life, and it is a real special one. Yeah, it's a 50th anniversary. It's hard to believe it was 1970 when you first witnessed the first astronomical event, whether it was a sunrise or set, moonrise or set, at America's Stonehenge. And so it happened to be the Winter Solstice, and it was the first avenue that we started clearing back in the mid-1960s. And by 1967, the avenue was actually opened up to the horizon, so you could actually watch a sunset over a monolith. And the monolith is located about 700 feet from the what we call the Astronomical Viewing Center. And unfortunately, with New England weather, it changes all the time, and it's not always predictable. And so in 67, 8, and 9, it was cloudy, I guess. So although we tried to watch it and get, so we could see it visually and witness it, it didn't really cooperate until 1970. And so December, I believe, 20th to 21st, 1970, my dad and myself and a neighbor of ours up in Derry, New Hampshire, where we lived at the time. He was in high school with me and a neighbor. We all came down and we met up with our manager, and his name was Warren Martell. And Warren worked at our place for several years, and he was very instrumental in opening up the first alignment and actually doing some calculations during around 67, 68, 69. And by then he had graduated from college. He got married, and he ended up in the nuclear industry. And but he was home in 1970, and we met up at his parents' home, and there was about a foot of snow on the ground, about a little bit more than we have right now, as a matter of fact. And so it's about a half a mile walk up the hill through the woods from his house. And the entrance that we use now for our visitor center, and we have used actually since 1958, wasn't plowed. It was just all full of snow and snow bankings and everything, so we couldn't access it that way. So we met up at his house that afternoon. We found he had built a wooden snowmobile, actually, out of parts from another snowmobile. So it was a wooden snowmobile, actually. I've never seen anything like it. But he was very talented and very creative, and the thing worked. And he actually broke the trail. So the half-a-mile trail, it was easy to walk behind the snowmobile. And so it'd take probably about 30 minutes or so to get up on top of the hill. And it was partly cloudy that day, and we're hoping it wouldn't cloud in, and that would be it again for another year, We'd have to wait to 1971. But we get up there, and it was very, very cold, and we get up there, and again, it was mostly sunny with clouds, and as we waited and watched, the sun starting to lower over that direction through the avenue towards the Winter Solstice monolith. The clouds were just a couple of them, and it was actually kind of nice because they made for a really beautiful, kind of a sky. And as the sun set, it went right through the clouds. It kind of opened up, and it set right on top of the monolith. And my dad had his camera, and he took slides, actually. He took a whole bunch of slides, just kept, shooting them. And so we held the whole sequence for several minutes of the sun setting over that monolith. And we kind of held our breath and everything, and we got a chill, not just from the cold, but we thought perhaps we were the first people to see that since maybe the original inhabitants, the people that built the site, which could have been thousands of years ago. And once we saw that, we were very, very sure that was the purpose of these monoliths, which were located several hundred feet and around the hilltop. And although people like Mr. Goodwin, the first researcher in 1937 when he began work, was aware of these stones, they didn't really do anything with them because they're way out in the middle of the woods. They were concentrating on the main site, and that was true for a couple of decades. And again, it was in the 1960s. Stonehenge Decoded, a book by Gerald Hopkins, came out, and he was at the Harvard Smithsonian Center for Astrophysics, originally from England. And he wrote that book, and it came out, I think he had a paper come out in 63, I think, and the book was kind of based on that, and that came out in 65. And the book became very popular. CBS TV actually picked up on that and made a documentary that year in 1960 called The Mystery of Stonehenge, I believe. I've seen it twice. I have seen the show twice, once live, and then we saw it at a library back in the 1970s when it was about 10 years old. And so researchers like my dad and a group called the New England Antiquities Research Association got very, very interested because of that book and the CBS special that perhaps these stones out there had a meaning and maybe they were aligned with the sun, moon, and stars. And so 55 years ago is when we actually began the research. And this coming solstice, we'll be celebrating the 50th anniversary, and it so happens it's a grand conjunction everybody's talking about. So it's kind of a really cool one, too, on top of that. Yeah, so, I mean, it's kind of neat. It's a big anniversary. I wish we had all the original people that worked on that still here with us, to be with us, and I guess in a way they will be in spirit. But we're hoping that the weather is good. I think the morning looks cloudy. And so, but the afternoon looks like the sun will start popping out, so we can only hope it's as nice as it was in 1970. And I can't believe it's been 50 years. That's a half a century. It seems like it may be, 10 or 20 years ago we did that, not a half a century ago. So we're all excited about it. We'll be there after the sunset and trying to watch the grand conjunction, and then, and hopefully get some really nice photographs. We're thinking of doing it live, too, live stream it, but I'm not sure we're going to be able to do that. I think Stonehenge and I believe Newgrange in Ireland, which I've been to both, will be doing a live streaming. And I think they have for a while. I think this will be kind of a neat one this year, too. If the weather cooperates over there, too, it should be pretty cool. So we might try to do that. Something we want to do. And if we don't get to it this year, we'll try to do it next year. And then people can watch it anywhere in the world, and hopefully the weather works,
Okay. Well, sounds like a great day out for the family to be there on Monday. But right as we were getting all set up to do the show, we had a caller, and Dennis, you laid the foundations for a lot of what we'll be discussing tonight. But Barbara, can we bring our caller Jay from Canada on? And he had a question, and we're glad to get his question answered. Hi, Jay.
Mic's open.
Okay.
Yeah. Thanks for taking my call.
Yeah. Glad you're here. Jay, this is Dennis. Dennis, this is Jay.
Hi. Good evening,
Hey
Jay. How you doing?
Pretty good. Up yourself?
I'm doing pretty good. Thank you for calling in this evening.
Yeah, you're welcome. I just wonder, we have a Canadian Stonehenge, and it's actually in a province where I live, and it's called Majorville Medicine Wheel, and I went to actually visit it about 10 years ago, and I had a really amazing spiritual experience there. And I did, this unlike the Canadian Stonehenge, is actually in line with Stonehenge in I think latitude or longitude, probably, or longitude, in line with Stonehenge. Yeah, along with it aligns with the Stonehenge in England, which is really interesting. So my question is regarding those wheels, or the wheel that you're talking about, the American Stonehenge. Was there kind of like these? Did it foresee some events like what's happening on Monday to happen? Did you see that show up? And just wondered what is the significance of that day, the 21st of this year, because it's a pretty big event, I think, this time around.
It is, yeah. Because the shortest day of the year, Yule, and the daylight will become longer after that, and all that. But it's a big event here, summer solstice, as far as people coming. Is the weather's warmer and everything, and that's a big one too. 6 months later. I have been to the Bighorn Medicine Wheel out in Sheridan, Wyoming, and I believe there's a couple in Saskatchewan, I believe, maybe a dozen, or that's probably an old number. They may have found more since then. But I know there are a number of them. They're pretty amazing. Like the one in Sheridan has 28 spokes, 28 days of the month, and it has, I think, cairns with 3 different star alignments, and I think it was about 10,000-foot elevation. So it was more of a summer solstice place, and by spring and fall, it became, it snows up there, most of the year, so it's more of a summer activity. And I think it was a crossing of a migratory crossing of animals too there. And my dad and my wife and my son at the time, he was pretty young, we went up there and saw that. And we were pretty impressed by that. And I was aware of some of the ones up in Canada. I've been up into Calgary and Edmonton and over towards British Columbia, but we didn't get the opportunity to visit any of the medicine wheels up there. I've seen a few photographs of them. And they're pretty amazing. Most Americans, don't know about these things, and they are pretty amazing. But ours has the 51 alignments with the sun, the moon, and stars. We surveyed the site from 1973 to 1977 by a professional survey team. It was Beverly Pearson and Associates. He was the president, I believe, of the New England Surveyors Association at the time. His son, Charlie, just retired from survey, so it's a family thing, And that information was sent to the Harvard-Smithsonian Center in 77. We got the results back in 78, and they said the alignments would work about 1800 BC, plus or minus so many years. But the 4 quarter days, summer, winter, spring, and fall, and then we have the cross quarter days, and then we have the 18-and-a-half-year lunar cycles. And I know the Sheridan medicine wheel actually has helical star rising. So you'd see the star on a certain day of the year, and it forecasts the summer solstice coming. Those are pretty cool. We have 24 star alignments, and that's one of the surprises in 1978 from that report. We did know we had a true north alignment with Polaris 4,000 years ago, due to precession, it was a star called Thuban in the constellation of Draco. But, we had a gentleman from Penn State University. He was a doctor of archaeoastronomy. He joined us in 97. Unfortunately, he died suddenly in 2001, just a couple of years after retirement, which is, for us, it was really sad to lose a friend like that, plus the research. But he actually worked on those 24 star alignments. We knew about one, so he worked on the other 23 alignments, with the different stars, including Sirius, Aldebaran, and Rigel. And we're still doing that work today. So, but that's basically what our site is, and I would love to get up into your area and see some of the medicine wheels up there. All I've seen is a few photographs of them.
Yeah, I got lots of photographs of it, and it's really quite a spiritual experience there. So, definitely, yeah. So, what about the significance of this? Maybe I'm just stealing your thunder, but is there really a significance to this solstice that's coming up?
Well, it's our 50th anniversary for one thing. As I don't know if you heard the show earlier. We started opening up the avenues in the mid-'60s, and by 1967, that particular alignment was cleared, so you could actually watch a sunset on the horizon. We had to clear out about 800 feet of trees. And in 1970, it was the first year that the weather cooperated. So, this is going to be our 50th anniversary, and then they had the grand conjunction of Saturn and Jupiter right after that in the evening, so people will be watching that too. It'll look pretty neat, But the significance is it's the first alignment that we have of the 51 that we actually watched, And my dad died about 11 years ago. Just about 11 years ago he died. So we found things since then. We found about 14 Serpentine Walls. We think they're inspired by the constellation Draco. These walls look like a serpent. They have a head, a body, and a tail. And they're finding them all the way from here throughout New England, New York. Connecticut has about 400 of them, 30 feet up to 300 feet in Connecticut. Our longest one might be 2,550 feet, which is twice as long as the Great Serpent Mound in Ohio, which is pretty spectacular. And they go right out to California, right out to Mount Shasta. There are a couple in Canada. I don't have the locations, but I've had radio shows with Richard Hyatt out of Hamilton, Ontario, and we talked about a couple of the serpents that are, I used to fly for American Airlines. I used to go to Toronto. So somewhere up near Peterborough, Ontario, but a little bit, east of there is where one of the serpent effigy structures is, So, but we're finding the same kind of stonework right across the nation, actually. Same shaped walls, serpentine walls, windows in the walls, and a lot of it's astronomical. So we think it is, anyway. Yeah, that's our best guess.
That's even the stone, the major real medicine wheel too, is that there's some placements of rocks where they can actually use almost like a rifle guidance in a way, and they use rocks to look at different other rocks and align what's going on in the sky too. Is really interesting too. Yeah. Like a gun sight.
Yeah, it's a gun sight, you have a foresight and a back sight. Some of our stones are actually notched with a V shape, almost like a gun, And you look through that, the V, and you're looking at a monolith, several hundred feet away, and then you're looking at your object, whether it's a star, the moon, or the sun, And but European, there's a lot of European sites like that up in Scotland and actually throughout the British Isles and into France. I've been all over that area. There are 50,000 megalithic sites, and many of them have those kind of gun sites, and some of them are located a couple miles distance. So they have a very accurate alignment,
Yeah,
ours are
that's amazing.
Yeah, the further the distance between the foresight and backside. Our biggest serpentine wall starts at a structure called the Watch House, and that is a sophisticated structure. It has an illumination effect inside of it that we found is on the equinox. The light and shadow actually through the doorway, like Newgrange in Ireland, will go in and illuminate a quartzite stone. We just found that out last spring by watching it, predicted by an app on a phone called the Sunseeker app on the phone by a friend from Texas. And she was up here before that. She goes, if you watch on the equinox, you're going to probably see an illumination. And she gave me about the time, around 9 o'clock. And last spring, we actually watched it. We got it on YouTube. We had a 30-minute. It's cut down by time-lapse to 30 seconds. But that stone, the boulder that's part of that structure, looks like a serpent's head. And we have LiDAR of it, the latest, LiDAR, handheld LiDAR. And that is amazing technology. And we've had about 15 acres of the 110-acre site already LiDAR'd. It's very work intensive. The guy walks around with a handheld LiDAR, and then you have to process all the data. It's about 600 hours he's done just on the 15 acres. But this Serpentine Wall starts at that boulder, and then it undulates behind it. The head is actually a lunar minor alignment, which will be in 2032, the next lunar minor standstills. When I say the illumination goes right in, beside it into what could be considered a womb, you get the sun, and then you have the rays and then the fertilization of the egg, kind of like Newgrange. The Chaco Canyon does that out in New Mexico. We were there last year. And several other different sites do that same kind of thing where, the male, the rays, the fertilization. But the serpent's head is not only a lunar minor, but it's also it's a February 1st, cross-quarter day. And the first hump behind it, because the wall undulates like the back of a serpent up and down, is November 1st, which is called Samhain or Samhain over in the old world. But Native Americans also celebrated these days, because I went to Mesa Verde a couple of times. We were there last year, as a matter of fact. And they have both the quarter days, summer, winter, spring, and fall, and the cross-quarter days, roughly May Day, August 1st, November 1st, and February 1st, which we have at our site. So Native Americans were doing this. And that wall goes around and touches every foresight astronomical alignment. I mentioned there's about 51. Comes back in front of itself after 2,550 feet, does another hump, which we've seen. I was here back when I was a baby in 1955, but we never knew what it meant, But it actually goes to a 90-degree twist with a pointed tail. And I don't know if Mark has that image of that LiDAR of that head, but you look at it and like, oh my God, it's a head of a serpent. It looks like it's biting its tail perhaps, which is an Ouroboros, which means the circle of life. Ancient Egyptians, ancient Greeks, there's jewelry made with that, there's artwork with that. And so it's an ancient symbol, and but it actually encircles the entire hilltop, and it touches every astronomical alignment. And then, like I say, it undulates in front of it's right by its mouth, and then it looks like it's biting its tail. And then it does a pointed tail. So it's kind of we just discovered all that in the last 4 years as far as the Serpentine Walls, and I think we have 14 of them. Some are linear, some are rectilinear, and some are curved. Beautiful sweeping curves to them. Unlike Farmer's Wall, or what we call agricultural walls in New England, which makes sense. They usually boundaries, field clearings, and stock fences. And they're usually pretty linear with some exceptions. But these walls don't do that. And these walls, a lot of them have windows, beautiful lintel windows. And we're discovering that in Vermont. We're finding that going all the way up to Colorado, these same kind of features. Alabama has them. They call them Rattlesnake Walls. And, it's something more widespread than just our site or the Northeast. Right across the nation. Indiana has one that looks like one of our curved ones, shaped like the letter S. And it's in the White River in Mountain State Park. I got a picture from 100 years ago. It's right in the middle of the river, this beautiful serpentine snake crossing. Again, it could be Draco, the constellation that inspired these people, but, since we can't talk to them, we can only speculate, I think,
Jay, is there a date on the Majorville medicine wheel? Do you know the diameter of this wheel? The reason why I was asking is Dennis has talked about the patterns of these stone walls, and get some of the chevron shapes, and going uphill. There seems to be a pattern across North America. Are we seeing something similar in Canada?
I'm not sure because the serpentine ones is that I don't. Yeah, I've been through 3 medicine wheels, and they're almost a pattern, like mound, and they're in high location. So the diameter of the ground, the main mound,
Barbara, we have an echo again.
Oh, you got an echo? Oh, Like I said, the one I'm aware of is up in Peterborough, and Richard Syatt was, I believe, it was a couple of years ago I did a show, and he was familiar with that. And, the medicine wheels are definitely a different style of construction, but astronomical, definitely, yeah.
Yeah, it's just interesting, like with the same diameters, like the Newark earthworks, was it like 1,054 feet or something like that, and you get like the same diameter circle in Chillicothe. It's just interesting to see.
Avebury, is Avebury the Great Circle? Is the same as Avebury. It looks very similar in style.
Right, and
Avebury in England. Yeah,
you get this same distance, and Avebury, what a little is older than Newark.
Oh yeah. It's funny. It could be just a coincidence, but they're similar. I think the diameter is the same, But when you look at the shape of the bank and ditch, I suppose it's only. But then the ditch is in a certain position in relationship to the bank, and the same. But when you look at pictures of both, it's like I haven't been to Newark. I used to, like I go to Columbus all the time, but I never get a chance to go over there. But I did go to Avebury several times in England. But I'd love to get to Chillicothe and Newark, to see that. And again, if I get up to Canada too, to see some of the medicine wheels up where Jay is, those are. I've seen the photographs. They look very, very interesting. Definitely.
It's just very interesting to see the repetition of. The same, like we've spoken about on other shows, standard unit of measurement, same diameters, similar patterns, like the chevron shapes. It's we don't have a lot of callers from Canada. It would just be interesting to get his Jay's perspective on. What he is observing there, and if it's the same as it is in the United States.
Especially standard unit of measure and shapes and designs. But I think it's great that Jay called in because a lot of people aren't aware that there are right across Canada, whether it's in Quebec where there's stone structures that are reminiscent of the ones in New England here. Chambers and structures and cairns and standing stone. And you get out there, to find the medicine wheels, sort of like the in Sheridan, the Bighorn medicine wheel in Sheridan, which we visited back in '92, and you had to drive, from the visitor center. Gosh, now '92, so almost 28 years ago. My dad went with us on that, and my son was only 2, I think. But we had to drive 25 miles from the visitor center and then up this huge hill, or mountain, 10,000 feet. And on the other ridge was an air route traffic control center. They had all the antennas up there, the radar antennas. It was so cool. You had this kind of modern techie thing on one ridge, and maybe a mile or two away, you could see it in the distance. It didn't really affect the Bighorn medicine wheel. I mean, it wasn't on top of it, And then you've got the Indian medicine wheel, which is, I guess would be in that case, Stone Age for the Native Americans. And it was so cool to see both of these, built by man, but different things in different time periods, But it was really, and it's high, like Jay said, they're usually up high, I think, and so high that that's only a summer solstice place, In the spring, winter, and fall, you were probably out of there, even if the climate has changed a little bit since it was built, it's still probably a pretty cold place, except for 2 or 3 months a year. So.
Okay. And since you were, we started the show talking about, the first alignment that, your family saw 50 years ago. You do have the forestry project resuming next week. Can you tell us a little bit more about the goal of this project? How it's a little different from what your family was doing 50 years ago. How's this B'nai balancing, taking care of the woods as well as historic preservation?
Yeah, there's a couple of different levels to that too. You want to thin out the forest, make it healthy. We have talked to like University of New Hampshire Forest Extension people have been up. One particular gentleman's been up a number of times. He retired, and then we get another gentleman, and we began discussing actually thinning the forest, also opening up more of the astronomical alignments. That's never been, complete actually. Fire management, have roads that we can have fire equipment on. 10 years ago, this last spring, we had 15 acres go up on us, and it almost got out of control. So we want to be able to fight a fire in that case, remove a lot of the fuel, the dead stuff. I go up there and take firewood out of the hill. 110 acres, though, I don't have that many lifetimes. So we want to thin the forest, make it healthy. We want to create more animal habitats, bluebirds and bats, and piles of brush for different animals, and because of deer population and turkey population, and we have a lot of hawks up there and a lot of bluebirds now, which is nice. And we're starting to see the bats, more bats now. We used to have them; they kind of went down a bit, but they're coming back now, which is nice. And we'll work with the United States, United States Department of Agriculture is working with us, kind of a parallel program. And our licensed forester was actually paid to write a 30-page plan about invasive species and then all the rest of it. So we're going to have a little bit more of a park-like setting. There'll be thinner woods. People will be able to use the trails further out than the trails that we use today. We'll have more snowshoe trails for sure. We'll have about 3 or 4 miles more of snowshoe trails. And we'll go to parts of the site that people don't normally, the hilltop, I said, people don't normally go to. A lot of these quarry areas or these big slabs are quarried by these ancient people, about 33 of them laying all over the hilltop. Some of them are enormous, and they're actually separated from the bedrock, propped up. And we're just starting to find some of these way out, up to 1,000 feet from the main site. And as we mentioned on previous shows, we found the first one in 82, excavated it in 1983. And the state archaeologist, Dr. Gary Hume, oversaw it. Dr. David Stewart Smith, who we lost only 4 years ago, he was with us for almost 40 years. He was actually really involved with the way the stones were quarried, shaped, transported. And to find out, after 1982, that we had probably 33 more, a lot of these were found in the last couple of years. And these will be more visible to the public, and some of the wall patterns that are serpentine and windows in them and all that, we'll have that more open. When it's a thick jungle like it has been, you can go like a couple hundred feet and get lost up there, and we can't have that with our visitors, But when you have it all thinned out, people can see, hundreds and hundreds of feet. We're not so afraid of losing our visitors out in the woods like we have had before. We've had that problem with people actually getting lost out there. We're going to open up the lunar alignments, the lunar major alignments, and that next event is 2025, and I believe it's 2034. I might have misspoke earlier. It's 9 years later that we'll have the lunar minors. So we have the lunar majors coming up just a couple of years, and then around 2034 we'll have the lunar minors. And we're going to have these open because you can actually, when you're doing an astronomical research, you can actually survey all these different stones, and you can predict, and calculate where the sun and moon and stars rise and set without even seeing it. And you would know it works because you have to have the horizon. So you have to know the angle of the horizon that affects the azimuth of where these heavenly bodies rise and set. But empirically to watch it, like we did in 1970, to actually witness it with your eyes is really a big deal, So you want to have both the calculations and all the survey work, but you want to be able to go out there and witness it. So 2025, we'll be able to go out there, hopefully if the weather's good, and watch the lunar major standstills north and south, which will be, we'll open it up to the public. It should look pretty cool. Those haven't been open, and we've been clearing trees since, starting around 1965 and 67 is when we had that Winter Solstice open. So 55 years we've been working, and this company has amazing equipment that can do probably in a couple of days that would take us a year to cut, like 800 feet of trees. they can go out there and they can open an avenue up, and you'd have it open like probably in an afternoon or a day. You're like, oh my gosh, the thing's all open, because we know we've done those, and at like 65 to 67, I think it took to open up the first alignment, a couple of years, So they can move right along, and they do make all the wood into different products like lumber. They make it into firewood, and they make it into wood chips. And that goes to the power companies to make electricity. And they also make it into, some of the lumber actually goes up to Canada, believe it or not, to make it into pallets, depending on the grade of wood. So everything is used, and all the scrap I pick up and I burn it in my wood stoves pretty much. And we're going to build out of some of the branches and stuff some habitat sites. So, concerned about, animals up there and healthy woods and nice astronomical alignments. I know at the Great Serpent Mound they planted trees several decades ago, so that, to help, I guess, with erosion and, wind and stuff like that. And some of those trees, I think there's cutting recently, but you couldn't see the summer solstice. It was totally blocked. And it was because not of trees that grew naturally, but trees that were planted years ago by people. And we love our woods, but gee whiz, you'd want to see an alignment. You're going to have to either remove the trees or you're not going to see it, So I think that was a bone of contention at the Great Serpent Mound in Ohio, which is a really amazing place. But I'd like to, if I was there, I'd like to see the alignment. Maybe they can just thin cut through the trees and you can watch it, still leave some of the trees there because we don't want to chop them all down for sure, So, but make a healthy forest.
It's a balance.
It's a balance, yeah. It's a really, and that's why we brought in a licensed forester. We interviewed a couple of them. And University of New Hampshire Forest Extension Service, they said, this place is a great candidate for this type of work. And taking care of the hilltop, keeping it green, making it healthy, make sure you can, don't have as much fuel out there for forest fires, and have fire lanes, and then they can get the equipment out there to fight the next fire if we ever have one. But it is a balance, yeah. We don't want to level the hill. 4,000 years ago, the hilltop, we believe, from all the shovel test pit study we've been doing, and we had the president of New Hampshire Archaeological Society with us doing a lot of that during the 90s, and she just retired this fall after all these years. And we were doing them, we did a big project in the 90s, and then we picked that up, and we were still doing shovel test pits up to recently. So we probably have about 90 shovel test pits. And from that, what she said is the hilltop probably was about 75% bare bedrock, 25% covered with, soil, and probably glacial soils and vegetation. And her husband was a doctor of geology at Tufts University for 30 years, so she had a pretty good background with that, and she traveled around the world with him. So she's an archaeologist, he's a geologist, and made a really nice team, and he helped the New Hampshire Archaeological Society out. He died 25 years ago, unfortunately, just as he retired. And she was doing the impact study on our local highway, which is still being worked on today, widening it. She did all the archaeological impact study back in the 90s, and then her husband was driving down there and somebody hit him in the car, and killed him. So, we lost him too, but the geology of the hill probably looked quite a bit different. We were talking about water levels and what did the place look like, but I can imagine that the hilltop was pretty open. And so with this forestry project, we're not going to level the trees, but we're going to have it a little bit thinner so you can get a better idea of the alignments, the Serpentine Walls, and all the rest of the different features up there. You'll be able to see them better, and it'll give you a little better idea of what the hill looked like. And it's actually beautiful where they've opened up some of the clearings. It's like, this is a really pretty spot up here. So we'll be able to see a little bit more of that. And that project should be done, I think, unless the weather doesn't cooperate. I'm thinking probably, just talking to the licensed forester yesterday, again, he was up this week, and then we talked on the phone yesterday. He believes they're going to start next week in the project and should probably be done, I think, sometime in February. He says it's going to go pretty quick because they did a lot of work a year ago getting everything laid out, all the roads and everything. And so, but the area they're doing now, not only outside where there's stone features they have to be careful of, but near the main site. There's 15 acres, and it's going to be a little bit slower going there because there's more walls and structures. They're going to have to be careful. But they won't get into the main site where the chain link fence is. That we can't get in there. You have to take the chain. It would be too dangerous, for the structures. But we are going to do the 15 acres surrounding that where all the astronomical alignments are, and then they're going to work out further on the next 90 acres. In North Stonington, Connecticut, there's a site there. It's basically the town with 8,000 features. And a book by Mark Starr came out 4 years ago. And you can see the same sort of stone features they have here, like walls that look like shark teeth, windows, like I mentioned. Serpentine Walls is about 400 of them. Similar stone structures, astronomical alignments, monoliths, and cairns and chevron walls, and walls shaped like the letter D as in Delta. And again, we're finding these across the nation too. But they did about 100 acres. Now, those structures, those 8,000, are over 35,000 acres on private and public lands. But there's one area that was kind of a protected area, and they just did about the same size area, just a little over 100 acres, where quite a few of these structures are. And they did such a nice job that you can see the structures. The trees aren't falling on the structures, uprooting. They removed them near the walls. And a couple of the forestry people went to the New England Antiquities Research Association meeting. They have 2 a year in the spring and fall. And last year, before COVID-19 took over, they still had the meeting. And the forester actually came in and gave a presentation on how to take care of the woods, how to take care of these structures, and as you mentioned, the balance, And so it was well done and well received. So that's kind of what we're doing.
Okay, and with the solstice coming up, what we're also going to get this grand conjunction. What is celestial phenomenon? Is that basically kind of like almost like what some people have hypothesized, that it's almost like this? That was the Star of Bethlehem.
Yeah, right. The Star in the East. Yeah, possibly. I guess the last one's the next one I think is in about 80 years, 60 years, right? 60 years. We had 2080. I think there's another one. I probably won't be around for that. I don't know. But yeah, it was 800 years ago. And then there's, I guess, because the orbital planes of Jupiter and Saturn, if they were both aligned on the same plane, you'd have this quite frequently, but they're tilted, So it doesn't happen that often, They do. There is a conjunction with them, but the one's above the other, and they're separated. And now I think they're going to be about 6 minutes or 1/10 of a degree, roughly, apart. So with the naked eye, they almost look like it's one object. I think a set of good eyes, somebody with good eyes or binoculars, you're able to separate them. But it's going to be pretty bright, and being on the winter solstice is so cool too. I mean, you can start to see it now anyway, a few days before and after, But I guess right on the winter solstice, it's going to be, at its maximum, alignment, which is really, is really pretty amazing, And for us to have our 50th anniversary, it's like that's pretty cool, to have that and our 50th anniversary, And I don't know, it'll be hundreds of years before that probably happens again, on that particular date. So yeah, I'm pretty excited about that. I just hope the New England Weather cooperates. If it's cloudy, it's like, whoopee, it's out there, but. You can't see it.
It just sounds like just for as horrible as 2020 has been, at least there's something unique and good happening at the end. Maybe, just hopefully usher in a much better year.
I think that's right, Mike. Yeah, it's been kind of a really rough year for everybody, and a lot of people lost their loved ones, and, a lot of people not traveling, doing it. We only went to Florida before it all began once, and that's about it for the year. But, I mean, people can't really go out to eat like they used to, and hopefully things will turn around. So I think it's kind of cool, I think it's kind of something people can actually enjoy together and look at and say, oh, that's pretty cool. It hasn't happened for so many years, and it ain't going to happen for, many, many more years. And especially with the winter solstice, to have it coincide with that. It's pretty neat.
Cool.
I'm kind of excited about that. Yeah, that should be live streamed, I think, So my daughter-in-law up there, she's good with technology. See if maybe she's got a new baby too. It depends on the baby, what the baby's up to, The baby's only 3 months old. So in fact, the baby was born when we were doing the optically stimulated luminescence testing that day on that Friday. I think you know about that, and she had to rush to the hospital, and we had 20-something people up there doing the testing. First time that's been done on our site. And, we're so excited about that. Next thing we know, I'm being told that my daughter-in-law is off to the hospital in emergency. The baby's going to be, the baby may be coming, and it's 5 weeks early. So and that was on 9/11 of all days, too, So another one of those things, it's certainly a memorable day. And I flew for American, and everything. So that day's always, for everybody, it's kind of a very sensitive, time. And then to have all these people up here doing the testing, and then my first grandchild, my granddaughter was born that day. And I didn't really I think she was born around 4:30. I didn't find out till like 5 o'clock or later because it was so crazy that day with all the people at our place doing the testing and everything. But those results, we might have mentioned that on this, we mentioned this before on the show, but the results I think will be probably around 9 months. I might get surprised, maybe it will be earlier, but roughly 9 months from now we'll get the results of the 4 cores that were taken, one of them at the watch house we mentioned earlier, and then the other ones were up on the Oracle Chamber in the main site, and also 4 other sites in New England were tested. In Connecticut, I think, in Massachusetts. At the time, I remembered where they were, but I forget now. But that might be kind of interesting because we know in Pennsylvania 2 years ago a separate project was done on a terraced land that they believe was man-made, and also a structure. And I haven't been there. I've been to Pennsylvania, but I've never been to that particular site unless I was a kid. I'm not even sure if people knew about it back then. Because in 1969, we all went down there and flew in Northeast Airlines and spent Thanksgiving riding around and seeing a lot of stuff down in the New Jersey, Pennsylvania area. And we saw quite a few different things, but they did optically stimulated luminescence. It took about 2 years to get the results back. I guess it's getting better now. And the structure is not, according to the last I heard, it's certainly not colonial or post-colonial as many some skeptics think or mainstream. The date, if it's accurate, the big thing is if it's accurate and it's done correctly, it dated, from what I heard was, and I read, was 450 BC. So it wasn't a colonial, post-colonial. It was pre-colonial and pre-Columbian and pre-Christian time period, 450. And I want to find out more about that because that's interesting, I mean, that's one of these struck sites we talk about,
So that was more of an Adena era site?
Yeah, that time period. And I wonder, if I would like to see the results of that because those dates give you a minimum date, So could the site have been sitting there before that, a few years, many years? I don't know because the structure we built and then the soil is deposited by natural causes, windblown soil and vegetation decay, or I suppose it could be somebody backfilled it too. But the idea is when did that soil see the light of day last, And so they're measuring that. And it's a radioactive kind of use laser beams and everything. And they even need these little devices in the cores for a year. And then they collect them and they actually have to measure that radiation that they collect over a year in those same holes. And they add that into the results, I guess. And that's why it takes a year, So I'd like to see more information about that. But the preliminary information, it wasn't, built a few hundred years ago. It looks like it's built over 2,400 years ago, And right, it would be in that time period you were talking about. But, was it built a few years before that or many, many years into an earlier time period? I don't know. So it's kind of a minimum date.
And Dennis, with these OSL testing, the testing technique, have you heard? I understand it's relatively new, but with any of the test results that have come back, are there any dates showing that there was a place contemporary with America's Stonehenge? Or are they all much later?
Well, that's a great question. I think that will be a very good question when we get the results back from our site and those other 4 sites. I mean, it's 450 BC is putting it back, and like I said, it could be older than that. So our site has carbon dating starting in 1966. There's over 12 carbon datings that were done, and the dates range from, one of them was a composite, contaminated sample that dated around 1800. 1690, I think it was. That was a root, 1690. Yeah, about 18 something. That was in 66. But the main site, the oldest dating was 4,000 years old, and outside the main site, there seems to be a fire pit about 20 feet from the North Stone, and that dated to about 7,400 years. So there's maybe a range of time that the site was used, and then, and that doctor from Penn State actually has 3 phases of construction. He used the carbon dating, and he also used the astronomical alignments. And he comes up with 3 different time periods, like Stonehenge was built in stage 1, 2, 3, ABC, over 1,500 years. And he has something similar to that on our site. It's his hypotheses or his theory, and it's back supported by some data, such as the carbon datings and the astronomical alignments. But unfortunately, he passed away before he could do more work on that to really support that hypothesis, more data and more research and all of that. So I think it's a good question, Mark. I think once we get our day back, we'll see, But that 450 BC was really interesting to me. I was like, wow, that's nothing recent, Now, the Upton Chamber in Massachusetts, about 60 miles from where my site is, and that site there looks like a igloo, if you will. And in Europe, they would call them a passage grave. Even Newgrange is kind of a passage grave, long passage. And although it may not have been a grave, there's some cremation things, but it may have been more of a kind of a temple, where people could go in there and watch these alignments, And but its alignment is with the Pleiades, and I believe the equinox. I'd have to double check the equinox, but there's some hills nearby that had structures on them, standing stones and stonework, and it's called Pratt Hill. And the alignment through the entranceway out to them, it's kind of a long entrance too on this Upton Chamber, and it looks at the Pleiades. And the Pleiades could be used, I guess, as bookmarks for the growing season, I've been told. Plus, the people kind of worship many different types of heavenly bodies, and the Pleiades were definitely one of them. But it has core belling in it. OSL dating was done in 2011 by Dr. David Stewart Smith again, and his assistant, who's been one of our assistants at our site for quite a few years now. And the results of that took almost 5 years for that OSL, so it is getting better. And the date on that, I believe, was somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, but I remember it was about 450, I think it was, AD. So this is before Columbus's time. And this latest project in September, they wanted to do that structure over again, which is always a good thing, to double check, triple check. But the town of Upton, Massachusetts has it as part of one of its historical sites. And I think they didn't have time to get the permits to do that. So I don't think they did the Upton Chamber again. I mean, that would be really neat if they did. But it may be an older structure, They wanted to get some dates from the back of it, I guess, or different parts of the structure, But it is a fascinating structure, and it's one of about 800 in the Northeast, and again, astronomically aligned, which is kind of cool too. When people call them root cellars, it's kind of an easy explanation. But root cellars usually have ventilation. They say 90% of the structures in the Northeast don't have ventilation, so the vegetables will probably rot. They don't have clay floors or something to insulate the floors against frost. They're usually bedrock, which would transmit the cold, and freeze the crops. And their entrances are quite often, almost all the time, aligned with some, cross quarter day, or some star alignment or something like that, or the Pleiades, as the Upton Chamber is. And the dry stone construction, they do have core belling in some of the structures, and they have stone roofs, no cement used, and you don't see the drill marks, the modern drill marks. So there's a lot. I think it came up with 10 different things and why these structures wouldn't be something that's colonial or post-colonial. It's possible some farmer did build some of these and we've, misidentified them, but I think the OSL will help too. It's pretty cool, If you can do the OSL, you can't always find charcoal everywhere, but OSL, all you need is dirt. But you need undisturbed dirt. It can't be disturbed by animals or humans or trees uprooting and all of that. And that's one of the fears because it was over $1,000 per sample. So make sure that if you take several cores, that you get cores where the soil hasn't been, messed up by anybody or anything. And that's why we brought in the ground penetration radar on top of the Oracle Chamber when they did that. So we had that data collected. And we also had the LiDAR, which also, it just shows down to the surface. Of course, it can't go below the surface, but the LiDAR really shows the structure. And then you use the ground penetration radar to look beneath the soil, the surface, And with that, if there's any question as to any contamination or, anything like that, they can look at that imaging and they can get more information about it. Yeah, it looks like it's been disturbed or no or whatever, you know. So, I mean, all it takes is like a chipmunk to get in there, a little animal burrowing into the roof, letting light on the dirt, and then this hole gets filled in, and then somebody goes in there years later and takes that core, and maybe the animal did it like, 100 years ago, and it'll say, oh yeah, that dirt's only 100 years old there, so it doesn't, and all the structure's 100 years old, when actually it's just a contaminated thing. And I think the radar might be able to detect that kind of disturbance. That's one of the things, and it was the first time we used OSL with LiDAR and ground penetration radar, on 9/11 that day.
Okay, so with the ground penetrating radar and doing the OSL, it is reliable for you or any property owner to try to cut down on some of these mistakes that groundhog burrowed in there, and the test comes back from last week or something like that.
Yeah. If you can afford it, like the testing itself, like, it was pretty expensive, and then you bring in the the radar, and there's a charge for that, of course, and then the LiDAR, but it's all really useful equipment. If you're doing something like that, spending all that money on OSL, it's probably good to use, get a nice LiDAR image. You don't have to, but it really, if you're going to, I think really important, you get the LiDAR, it really maps everything perfectly, down to about a centimeter. And then you use the ground penetration radar. And what they're going to be doing, the two people that have the two different companies are going to blend their imaging together. So we'll have 3D above and below the ground imaging, on different parts of our hilltop. And it's the first time they've really done that. And again, and they were doing that back in the spring and in the summer. And then on 9/11, we brought them in again to have them there that day with the other, couple dozen people up there, and to have all that equipment used together, I think, is the very first time. But yeah, so this question, they can go back and look at the radar. We really ran it over the Oracle chamber. We saw some interesting stuff. One thing we didn't know is that the soil on the top of the roof was so deep, and that was discovered not with a radar initially. I went up there with a T probe and a tape measure, and I took the T probe. My dad made it years ago, and I put it into the roof. We had to find a couple of places to do this coring, with the OSL, and find a good candidate places, that would be undisturbed, and the soil had to be a certain depth. And when I started, I only took I poked 4 holes, and I marked them with flags so they won't be, wouldn't be dug or wouldn't be cored, because they're just about maybe the rod's maybe about a half an inch across, maybe a little less. Anyway, I put the rod into 4 different places on the top of the Oracle chamber, and I marked them with flags. And my surprise was that they went from over 17 and a half inches of dirt on top of the roof of that chamber to 24. Our guess was there's probably about 4, 5, or 6 inches. And when we talked to the people from NERA that were kind of working with Dr. Feather from the University of Washington, they stated that it had to be several. They gave me a more like, maybe a foot of dirt would be good. They didn't give me an exact amount. But when I told them 17 and a half inches to 24, which really surprised the devil out of us, it doesn't look like that much depth there. Right to the roof of the chamber, they were like, that should work as long as it's not disturbed. So they took a couple cores from the top, they took a couple from inside, and then they did the watch house, the wall in front of the watch house too. So we have 4 cores, and then they worked on the other sites in New England too. And I wanted to go with them on that, but I didn't have the opportunity to. We were too busy at the museum. But so in about 9 months we'll find out. There'll be a lot of explaining to do. The dates could come back. They may disagree with one another. They may come back agree with one another. And they may come back and agree with our carbon dating and the astronomical data and the stone tools and the way the stones are shaped using, percussion flaking, which is a Stone Age technology. Or they may come back and disagree with that. And then, so there's a lot of questions going through my mind, and kind of anxious about it and excited about it too, what it will be. But so far the sites they've tested are older sites than mainstream would have guessed,
Yeah, and since we've been talking about these structures, last Friday on Ancient Aliens, they were examining these Cyclopean megalithic structures of Malta. You've toured Malta and the huge megalithic structures in Brittany. All these megalithic sites may predate the pyramids, and in the 12th century, Geoffrey of Monmouth marveled about the stones from Stonehenge being transported from Africa to Ireland and where they are now. Do you have any idea of how the massive slabs at your place were set there?
Yeah, our slabs are native or from the hill, actually. We've pretty much, it's the same rock material. We found some of the quarry sites, and I mentioned probably 33 different quarried slabs that are still in situ. And their original quarry socket, but they've been raised up, split from the bedrock. They've been propped up, usually with a field stone, a foot, 2 feet across, and somebody stuck it underneath the stone to hold it up in the air. And that gave them an angle to use a hammerstone to start dressing the stone or shaping it with percussion flaking. And that's what David Stuart Smith and Dr. Gary Hume found in 1983, the year after that stone was located, the very first one, that there's all these little stone flakes along the edge of it and buried with several inches of soil. So it had been done a long time ago when the bedrock was bare. These people would walk around and see the hilltop. It was pretty clean of trees, and it was pretty much just bare bedrock. And you could look out there and say, oh, this is a great spot to try to pry up this piece of ledge, Today, if you walk around up there, it's most of the hilltop is covered with soil and trees and brush, and you'd be without ground penetration radar or digging all the dirt up. You would say, where am I going to find bedrock to pry up? It's all covered with earth. We dig everything up here. But back in the ancient times, it made sense. And so these slabs that are up there, they're propped, they're slowly becoming buried with earth. It makes them a little hard to see, but some of them are 10 feet across, 12 feet across. A few of them are 4 or 5 feet across, and they're slowly being hidden by soil, by the deposit of soil, It's about an inch every 125 years in New England, but on a hill like ours, it's slower because of erosion. But so they didn't move our stones from, great distances. They moved them maybe up to 1,000 feet and up the hill. So if you have a multi-ton slab, it's still a question as how did you move it. And if it was mostly bedrock back then, it's pretty solid surface. And it's not too rough, because there is exposed bedrock up there. A little bit bumpy, but, you could actually take log rollers, It's a matter of, what did they use to pull it with, and they didn't have beast of burden, so it must have been people, with ropes of some kind, and they must have hauled them up the hill that way, and some of them are down on the sides of the hill, and the intention would be to bring them up to the main site where some of the structures, their rocks probably came from the same areas that these stones are still sitting. And in England or in Europe, they call these stones that never made it to the structures. They're still near their quarry. They call them lazy stones, They shouldn't pick on the stones like that. It was the people that didn't move them, but they're still sitting out there. And so it's a matter of log rollers, perhaps, and some sort of ropes. And it's speculation on our part because we can't find the tools. They've rotted, And then when they get them to the main site, when you build a chamber, you build the walls first, and then you either put wooden cribbing inside the structure to stabilize the walls, or you fill them with earth. And then you use an inclined plane next to the structure, perhaps, to bring the stone up and then place it on top. And some of the roof slabs, like the biggest one on the main site today, is about 14 tons, almost 30,000 pounds. It's estimated at. It's 163 pounds per cubic foot, so we can actually take the dimensions and you come up with a weight. And they would move them up and set them on top of the roofs. And once that was done, they could start digging out the dirt or removing the cribbing, the wooden cribbing inside the structure, perhaps. And the weight of the rocks really hold the chambers together. Once you remove the roofs, they fall in by natural causes or people, vandalism or just people wanting these slabs. The walls will start falling down very quickly, just a matter of decades or so, these walls will start crumbling without the weight of the roof. So the roof is what really holds the structures together. And some of them do have the core building, in the corners. The oracle chamber, or the east wing of it, is all core build. It's that inverted staircase kind of, not a true arch, but that it's kind of cool, and you see that in many ancient European sites. That kind of a core bend effect. So yeah, it's the roof slabs that hold the structures together. Probably simple machinery. I know David Stewart Smith again. He spent a lot of time on how the stones are actually removed from the bedrock. How did you separate it? First off, maybe working a fissure or crack, but you had to be able to see it. Again, so you go back thousands of years when the hill was pretty bare, you could actually probably spot these places and say, hey, I think we can get that piece of rock out of there, And then once you prop it up, you start hitting it with hammerstone, shaping it like a multi-ton arrowhead, if you will, percussion flaking. And then once you get it dressed in the shape basically you want, it would lighten the load a little bit, and then you start transporting it. You bring it up to the site, and then maybe you make some final, that's why we still have flakes from the 3,000-year-old and 4,000-year-old carbon dating on the north side of the north wall of the chamber in ruins. There's all these little spallings that were found in 1969 and 71 when they found the 3,000 and 4,000-year-old carbon datings. They found the hammerstones, rubbing stones, stone tools. So once a big slab, even if it had been dressed out in the woods, or there wouldn't have been much woods out there, but out of where it came from, and then transported, you still probably have to do some final finish work on it. Shaping it a little bit more, to make it fit. And then you find all the little flakes of stone where they were finishing it off, and that's what we found on the main site. Plus the tools to do it with. So it's still a mystery. How did they move the stones from the Preseli Mountains in Wales down to Stonehenge? Some people think that they either floated them over there in boats, they dragged them over land, or the rivers were frozen. But when they look at the weather patterns back then, the climatologists say, well, it was a warmer time period 5,000 years ago, so the rivers wouldn't have been frozen enough to bring them up like the Avon River, the one that goes near Stonehenge. I've been there a few times. It wouldn't have been frozen. You couldn't have, put it. The ice wasn't there, at that time when it was being built. So good idea, but when they look at they can look at pollens and different things. They can pretty much tell what weather was. As you go back thousands of years. Tree rings and all sorts of different, like I say, they do flotation, they look at pollen samples, and then they look at ice sheets, up in Greenland and stuff like that, and they can get an idea of what was going on in the world. And then during the time of Stonehenge, I think it was warm, so they couldn't have put them on ice. So they're still debating that, how did those stones get there, It's like 150 miles for the blue stones. And then the Sarsens came from about 18 or 19 miles up in Marlborough Downs. That's still a long ways when you're pulling a 30-ton stone. You don't have trains and trucks and cranes that we have today anyway. So good questions. I don't know. But and then you get out to the mound builders out west. How the devil did they build those mounds? They say they use baskets, You look at Cahokia or something like that, Or even, you mentioned Newark and Chillicothe. How much work went into that, But people were ambitious, that's for sure. They weren't sitting around. That's a lot of ambition. Good engineering too, I think, and astronomical too, to line it up with the heavens, and probably some mathematics too involved with that, and then a standard unit of measure you were mentioning earlier too. All of these things, and that's why we can use that LiDAR too, to work on a standard unit of measure. Is that megalithic yard, or 83 centimeters, 2.72 feet, that seems to be in South America. Also in Mexico, and then in some of the mounds in the southern part of the United States, and we seem to have it here in some of the New England sites. They haven't measured them all, You can use the LiDAR, is wonderful, and then they have a thing called laser scanning, and I think our LiDAR person said, yeah, and they have to set it up on tripods like they did it in Machu Picchu, but it's a very time-consuming and very, very expensive piece of equipment, so the rates go way up when you pay somebody to do that, but you can get really, really accurate measurements with that. But the LiDAR, I think, is the next best thing, and it's really good, So we're going to be using that because on the LiDAR imaging with the computer, Tom Elmore, whose company it is, GeoNav, amazing what he can do. What he showed me he can do with his computer. We can measure down to a centimeter. So I think we're going to be able to work on that and see what we come up with. We already think it's the megalithic yard, by measuring it, even starting in the 1970s. So, but that may be a very good piece of evidence that the site again wasn't built by some shoemaker. Or some people say that the Patty family were there, and they were, but it doesn't look like a farm. It doesn't look like a shoe shop if you just look at the site, and it doesn't look like a cider mill. And when Roscoe Whitney, the MIT engineer, worked on the site back in the 1930s, he measured everything, and he had a plane table. He did cross sections, profile, and plan view, and he mentioned that because I've measured every wall, every niche, and every roof and everything. He goes, whoever built this either didn't give a damn about linear measurements or know anything about these, because I looked at the imperial measurements of inches, feet, and yards, and this site does not conform to that. So that was in the 1930s, So I was still working on that 80-something years later.
So, yeah, that's one of the enigmatic aspects of your property is, you're talking about the imperial measurements, megalithic yard. Seems like could have been employed there. That's just one of the things we just haven't been able to figure out yet.
Yeah, and that's really a good piece of evidence, because when you build anything, a plane or a house or a shed or whatever, a car or whatever, anything you build in the world, there's a certain measurement. The Egyptians used like the cubic, and they had another measurement, which I can't remember the top of my head. The Minoans had their foot. I think you've mentioned that to me. Roughly about 12 inches, a little different, and then the Spanish had the Vera, which was actually 32.68 inches. The megalithic yard is 32.64, so very, very close. There's one in India, and I believe it's called the Kishku, but I've seen another name for it, so that name may not be correct. It's like a royal measurement, I think, and it was roughly just under 30 inch. Under 33 inches. So it was very close to a megalithic yard too. And Dr. Clark from BYU, I think he had the 83 centimeter. In fact, you sent me some of the data from him, but he had that other one too, and it was like, and you were correct, it was an 86 centimeter for a different measurement, standard unit of measure too, and it had a different name. So ancient people did use some sort of standards, I think.
That's what just why I like having you as a guest is, we just kind of see something different emerging at your place. It just, I don't know if it's like a crossroads. It's just, it's just, one of those places where with the absence of any DNA testing, you can look for what contemporary cultures were doing, using, and it's kind of really not all revealing a whole lot of clues. You get the corbelled ceiling that you already discussed, the ibex petroglyph. It would just be neat to find definitive proof of, like that megalithic yard, the imperial measurements, something to get a little bit of writing with the ball stone.
Dennis dropped off, but he'll be back, I'm sure.
Oh, okay. I was just sitting there just rambling on about. Yes, I didn't know that, but that.
Wait, you're talking the corbelled construction. In some of these chambers, and Patrick and I saw that a lot too. Dennis is back.
I'm back. The woman on the computer told me goodbye. She said goodnight to me, but I'm back, I think.
I'll have a talk with her after the show.
Please do. Yeah, she was nice about it, but all of a sudden I'm like, what? But the other one, Barbara's talking about the core bell. And the other thing we found too just recently, I guess, we found since 2016 the possibly 14 serpent walls and about the same number of windows, but the trapezoid shape too, the groove on the table is trapezoid, not rectangular. There's a niche to the left of the table. It looks like a little animal pen, if you will. And I looked at it a few times and said, gosh, this thing looks, it's not right angles. It's not rectangular or square. It looks trapezoid. And so we measured it. It's a little rough to measure because the rocks there aren't squared like they are in, some of the, maybe like in Egypt, and that kind of thing. But overall measurement, one end was wider than the other. And in the chamber, like a chamber in ruins, the roof slab has fallen in. It's about a 6,000 or 7,000 pound roof slab and a 1,000-pound lintel. So it's a little hard to work around in there. But my son is an engineer, and we got in there and we measured it, and it came out like a trapezoid. The patty chamber, which is not built by the Patties, but it's a structure that was down near where their cellar hole was, and that looked trapezoid. And then the hole where the Patties' house was sitting was, we think, an ancient courtyard. And what we did is we looked at the LiDAR, and again with Tom Elmore, and we're looking at that just visually. And when you look at the LiDAR, it gets rid of all the vegetation, and it's good down to a centimeter approximately. And I said, Tom, does that look trapezoid to you? He goes, oh, yes, absolutely. And then we looked at the next structure. And you can see the LiDAR's cool because as you walk around in the structures, it does the interior too. You can see the plan view. It's like stripping off the roof, if you would. And it's trapezoid. The next structure, trapezoid. The little niche next to the table, trapezoid. It's like that trapezoid patterns popping up at our site. What its significance is, I don't know, but I did read some of the megalithic sites in England have a trapezoid shape. So, but it's not. But it's in South America too, so it doesn't identify a culture. It's in different places in the world. I'm sure there's other places I haven't even thought of, in other parts of the world, other continents with a trapezoid. But I think a shoemaker, colonial, post-colonial, would have done 90-degree corners, and it would have been rectangular or square, not this trapezoid thing going on, So that's another thing we discovered too. So we got to kind of look at, we're going to do a little bit more research and see if we can determine, if ever, what that means,
One of the, jump a little too far ahead of myself here, but the earliest professionally done carbon-14 dating is of like a overnight or weekend cookouts from was like 5,000 BC. Then 3,000 years later, the stone construction seemed to have started. Then it's there seems to have been a sudden pause. Then the hill was reutilized, later, such as at the glacial cliff shelter. One of my interests in this prehistoric study is, why were these archaeological sites suddenly abandoned? You get the Adena using the Kanawha Valley in Charleston for multiple generations, and all of a sudden it's kind of stop building mounds, and they basically vacated the area. We have other archaic. What happened at your place with the sudden abandonment? Like like you showed me with the rocks propped under the slabs, and the work wasn't finished.
Yeah, when we found more of the big slabs, like like the first one in '82, and through the '80s we found a few of them up there, and again they're getting kind of hard to see because very slowly they're getting covered with earth and vegetation. But as we found more and more of them, particularly I retired in 2016, we found even more And it's like, wow, there's like 33, I think we got now. It's like, wow, these guys must have had a bigger plan. And if that's so, they weren't done with the site. If they weren't done with the site, what happened to them? They had big plans and then they went away. I think the OSL will help because they did the Oracle Chamber and then we did the wall in front of the watch house. It might give us a better idea of when the big 2,550-foot Serpentine Wall was built. Was it contemporary with the Oracle Chamber, for instance? And the Oracle Chamber, was that built at the same time as the rest of the structures in the main site? Was it built at a different time by descendants or ancestors of these people? Was it different people? And if the standard unit of measure changes at our site, like some of the structures conform to that, but then you get another structure that doesn't quite, it's a different, seems like it doesn't fit. Maybe it's a different group of people. So those things might give us a little bit more, information as to, was a site continuously used? Was it used and abandoned and then used again? And I think if you have a different measuring system being used there, that would be really interesting. If it does exist, we don't know, of course. And and if the OSL dates are different too, on the Serpentine Walls, which we think they might be. Like some people think the Serpentine Walls were later, and some people say maybe they were an earlier. I'm thinking maybe later, but just because of their arrangement in relationship to the watch house, in relationship to the site. But that could be wrong, I don't have any idea what time period difference there is, but it's like, yeah, it looks like it's old. We do know that maybe the astronomical center was at this boulder, which is to the west of the main site, and it's actually one of the 4 collinear alignments for the mid-year alignment. Some people call it the equinox, but it actually divides the year into quarters or halves. And there's 4 points on that west alignment. And that boulder actually back in the 70s, they noticed that too. So I have a map that is based on that, with all the alignments off of that boulder, not where the 2 cairns were just north of the sacrificial table. And we were talking of that, almost 45 years ago, that we think that the astronomy evolved and changed, and they actually moved the astronomical center. So if that's true, it sounds like different people too, different time periods, definitely different time periods, But boy, if that sum is different, standard unit of measure, and if we get the OSL dating back, dating at least one Serpentine Wall different than the main site, that would be really interesting, because I know you're really interested in that. Why was site abandoned? Was it multiple use? Was it a layering of cultures? I don't know.
Yeah, and when I do my scribblings from time to time, I can't read mine when I do that. I can't make out my hieroglyphics. Like, what did I write? Yeah, but somewhere after I try to decipher what I wrote, there's usually something about the mounds in the Ohio Valley. It's started off as an archaic burial, and you get the Adena and Hopewell, and the Fort Ancient. It's like 3,000 years of people buried in one mound. It's probably reason. It's
wow.
So difficult to figure out what culture was there. No one wants to really deal with it. So, but
definitely.
You do have that. The Wigwam site that was found in the parking lot. I think you said that was much more recent. So what you have going on there, it does make it really intriguing. Like, how long was it being used as some kind of ceremonial center? That does not seem to be any kind of burial ground. It was, people gathered there for a reason, but it's fascinating to figure out, ponder how long was it actually used?
That's a great question. Stuff. I mean, there have been humans in New Hampshire and Native Americans go back. There's paleo sites in northern New Hampshire and a couple other places. They go back over 10,000 years. So sometimes people go, well, the site's 4,000 years old. Who was here 4,000 years ago? And we were just in that discussion with somebody the other day, too, that very discussion. And people have been here at least 6,000 years before the site was built, from our best evidence of the age of the site. But, yeah, there's a 7,500-year-old carbon dating, too, up near the North Stone. And the North Stone itself, we got 1989 through 91. That was actually excavated, and when our archaeologist, who was president of the New Hampshire Archaeological Society at the time, joined us, she was open-minded enough to come and take a look at the place, and she stayed with us for 31 years. And she's still going to visit us. She's still around. But she worked on that for 3 years, and the date on that was about 650 A.D. There was a fire pit right in front of the North Stone. So 20 feet away, we have a 7,400-year-old date, and then 20 feet back in front of the North Stone, there's a 650 AD. It doesn't date the stone to that time, but just so somebody at 1,300 years ago built a fire in front of that stone that was standing there, used it as a backstop for a fire. So that's like a couple thousand years difference in time. And then we have all the other carbon datings. And the Wigwam, 2 carbon datings from 2 fire pits. It was about a 30-foot diameter wigwam, roughly. All the pulse moles were still there, and that was found by that archaeologist too, with her assistants. And that dated 2,000 years old and 1,700 years old from 2 fire pits, and they found grease from cooking. And that could have been carbon dating because it was organic. But I think they were, after the 2 dates, they ran out of funds for the year, so that dirt with the organic grease in it, was never done. And that was almost, 28 years ago. On the other side of the parking lot, they found a cooking rack, and they found charcoal. And unfortunately, they had already used up their budget for carbon dating, and that was never dated either, which is unfortunate. So that area around the parking lot may have been a village, perhaps, and just below it is it goes downhill to our neighbor's property, and they had about 60 acres over there. And it's all kind of wetlands today, but our feeling, talking to our archaeologist and Dr. David Stewart Smith, too, and a couple other people, is probably a pond there at one time. So 2,000 years ago, you would have been looking at a wigwam. Just look down the hill, you would have seen they were living right next to a pond, which today has trees, and it's kind of swampy down there and everything. So, landscape has changed somewhat. And the glacial cliff shelter on the other side, opposite the wigwam, on the other side of the hill, probably 3/4 of a mile away, we found pottery in the 1950s, and that pottery stylistically dated to Middle Woodland period pottery, roughly 2,000 years old, maybe as early as 2,500 years old. So it dated to about the same time as the wigwam. The thought was maybe that was a summer camp under the glacial cliff, and that overlooks the Spigot River, which is a tributary of the Merrimack River, one of the larger rivers in New England that goes out to the ocean. And the wigwam was a winter camp, and it's a dome kind of a shaped structure, and it would maintain its warmth. And it's sheltered on that side of the hill from the northwesterly winds. The glacial cliff shelter is facing the northwesterly winds coming in from the north and from Canada to stay cool for the summer. So they may have migrated across the hilltop, seasonally, summer and winter. So that's a time period around the time of Christ, roughly, the Common Era. And then we have dates all around that, as you've mentioned, So, your question's excellent. And maybe with OSL, maybe the standard unit measure, maybe we'll have a little more light shed on that. Maybe we can have a little more precise information, or at least a theory. This is a time period this happened, and the Serpentine Walls came in around this time period. If we had more money and we could do more OSL dating, we would definitely do it along some of those walls, particularly the Serpentine Walls. And maybe that will happen too. Maybe this will generate interest. And hopefully some funding for that, because it all costs money, obviously, to do this. It's quite expensive, but it's pretty cool technology. And, there are about 800 sites in New England. It'd be kind of neat if they could do several dozen of these, I mean, maybe they'll have to, I hope that happens,
Mm-hmm. And Dennis, you were just mentioning pond, swampy area. And since you've had more time to go through the archives since you've retired, you've been looking at the topographic and contour maps. Those look very interesting, and sounds like some of the swamps were there thousands of years prior to any of the stone structures being built. But what do these maps tell us about the lay of the land, the elevation, where bodies of water used to be? They could have, the swamps could have been nearly drained by the time the chambers were built. But are we seeing any kind of anthropological pattern of building near a swamp or water or something like that? Elevations.
Yeah. Generally, these structures, not always, are built on the sides of hills, but not always, And they can be small hills, too. There's one over in Danville, New Hampshire, and it's on like a little mounded hill, but it's built on the side of it, But our hill's fairly big. It's about 360 feet above sea level. And we're just at up in Vermont at, I think it's Calendar One site in Woodstock, and that's built on kind of the side of a hill. It's a very gentle hill, but it is a hill, and it's up, the elevation's pretty high. And there are rivers up in that area, So these structures are always from a river, maybe not next to a river, but not too far from a river, because they may have been used as highways, and also Native American pathways or trails, which are usually based on old deer trails, became footpaths, and then some of the footpaths became where they had wagons during the colonial, post-colonial, and today they're roads and secondary roads and highways. And on the west side of us is the Pawtucket Native American Trail. On the east side is the Pawtucket's on the west, and the Pentucket is on the east. And those are actually Native American tribes too, and they were part of the Pennacook, which is part of the Abenaki, Wabanaki, Algonquin, I should say, Native Americans. Definitely the Abenaki. Yeah, I think Algonquin means the language group, but they were part of the Native Americans. So we had Native American trails, and we also had the Spigot River on the west side of the hill, where the glacial cliffs is above that. And on the east side, there are brooks, and there's swamps, wetlands, and ponds today, right down to the Merrimack in a city called Haverhill. It's in Massachusetts. And if the land has changed its elevation a little bit, and the valleys have silted in, and the swampy areas have silted in. Were ponds at one time. I've seen that in my hometown of Derry, where we used to be able to. There was right down from my house, about a mile away. There was a pond, and in the last 50 years, it's silted in so badly, probably because of beaver dams and stuff like that, that it turned into like weeds, and it's got just a narrow little channel through it now. They used to be able to boat around the whole thing, and that's only in 50 years. So thousands of years, the Earth has been rebounding from the glacial period, and we still have earthquakes in northeastern Massachusetts, pretty active. We talked about the Clinton-Newbury fault line that runs from Newbury, Mass, down near the mouth of the Merrimack River, and it runs south of the Merrimack River down towards Worcester, Mass, which is about an hour west of Boston, and then it goes into Connecticut, right by the North Stonington structures, the 8,000 structures. And so we have our hill is bisected by a very large fault, and it's part of that. It's like one of the branches of the Clinton-Newbury fault. And I've talked to geologists. We just had one here on 9/11 when we were doing the Osl dating. He had a master's in that, and he was also a geophysicist. And I was talking about that crack through the whole hill, and I showed him pictures out by the cliff where it continues. So when the glaciers were here, this area was pushed down probably 1,000 feet during the last glacial maximum, with maybe a mile of ice. And they say it was about 317,000 pounds per square foot, 2,200 pounds per square inch of pressure being exerted downward. And so this area may have been pushed down to maybe up to 1,000 feet. Once the glaciers left, that weight was no longer there, and it's been rebounding like a sponge ever since. So a few thousand years ago, this area in the valleys may have not been silted in, number one, and then the elevation of the land may have changed enough to shed the water out of these areas that somebody could have navigated up the Merrimack. Today you can come up to about 5 miles from the bottom of our hill. 4,000 years ago, these maps that you mentioned, I sent you some photographs of a gentleman that was a professor at Harvard University, and he was really, it wasn't his field, but he was very interested in water tables and the topography of this land and how it looked. He did a lot of work on this, and he talked to people from the USGS constantly. I even took a trip up to Pembroke, New Hampshire, where there's the Vermont, New Hampshire, it's the office for the USGS. And, they couldn't give us any precise, for certain years, but they could give us general information. And so it looks like the hilltop was probably, you go back in time, had more and more water around it. Today, where there's wetlands and small ponds and swamps, were actually probably navigable. And it may have been, you might have still had to have a portage coming up here, but the area was, the hilltop looks like it was almost a peninsula as you go back to about 4,000 years ago. And you go back earlier than that, it may have been more of an island, when you go way back towards the end of the glacial period, roughly 12,000 years ago. And 12,500 years ago, this area was free of ice. The margin, the edge of the ice was, I think, up near Concord, New Hampshire. I have a map showing that. That may or may not be the latest information or accurate, but that's what I show. So if you've been here 12,000 years ago, the ice was already north of here, or even going back 12,500. So 4,000 years ago, probably, was more water around this hilltop. And bigger, the rivers were deeper and wider. To the west of us, where the glacial cliff shelter is in the Spigot River, it's a big valley there. So I can imagine right after the glaciers, that was just flowing with water and then very slowly going down over time, to what it is today.
Okay. Yeah, that's and the variety of maps looked like the researcher was meticulous. It's just fascinating to see how water is kind of been used as a ceremonial, always had a ceremonial function for, way back, even before, baptisms in the River Jordan. And it's just been part of the human created ritual activities. It's really neat, but a somewhat related question to what Jay asked. The old world placed a lot of emphasis on the February holiday.
Mm-hmm. I'm starting to hear a little bit of feedback, I think, right now. But yeah, the February.
Yeah. I think that this tech issue isn't totally worked out yet, but anyhow,
it's been good though for now. Yeah.
The winter solstice is a pretty significant day in the calendar that the ancients set up at your place. If we maybe look at some the anthropological evidence, could like almost like a New Year's celebration have if it's the same people who were coming from the old world to southeastern New Hampshire, Could the change in ritual be an example of you're farther away from the mother church? You're going to make some adaptation to suit you.
I think that's true. I mean, I know, like, even Carthage, one of the prime Venetian, cities, it actually changed. The Phoenician coast, Syria, Jordan, Israel, Lebanon, was the Phoenician coast, and it had, different cities there. And as they went west and set up 50 trading ports around the Mediterranean, because Carthage became one of the biggest ones, and some of the gods actually, like Ashtati, changed, like became Tanit, I think, or vice versa. I'm really pretty tired today. We had a lot of stuff going on, but they changed the name of some of the gods, and some of their things changed a little bit in Carthage. From where they came out of Tyre or Beirut or Byblos or any of those cities, or Palmyra, wherever the Phoenicians, they came out of that area, they actually changed, So maybe here too, if they came, Native Americans may have had a big hand in this too, in this site. We just don't know, or maybe had little. But I would imagine they would have met whoever these people were that built this site and others throughout the Northeast, and they would have rubbed off on each other some of the ideas, and that would have changed them too. And if these people were from overseas, obviously, even by themselves, they would have changed, somewhat. But meeting other Native Americans, people will have an influence. They might have intermarried, that kind of thing. So there's a lot of speculation. Unfortunately, we don't have all the details. But hopefully we can find out more about the site through new technologies, and then we can have a better idea of the time period or time periods. Where these people came from. Was our site related to other sites in the Northeast and maybe across North America? But, and then some things like the Serpentine Walls, they look so similar across the country. Were these people in contact with one another? Are those Serpentine Walls contemporary with the ones out here? Was it something that was built over a long time period and trade, between groups, This group traded with some people further west, and they traded with people further west only to get out to the West Coast, and some of the ideas would have been shared, Or did people travel vast distances for trade and migration and bring those ideas? I mean, there's all these questions. I think the Serpentine Walls are fascinating because they're just, they're in Alabama, they're in Indiana, they're out in Colorado, in Mount Shasta, a town called Wheat, California has them. It's in the chevron pattern walls, and the walls that go from boulder to boulder zigzagging are there too. We have those here, and they're in Connecticut and they're elsewhere. And then walls shaped like the letter D is in Connecticut. We have one at our site. I saw another site somewhere in New England that has that, and they're in Colorado too, along with the Serpentine Walls and some of the other features. It's just kind of puzzling at this stage, and since mainstream seems to be either unaware or they not interested, or they ridicule all these sites as coincidental and made by farmers, 200 or 300 years ago, and unfortunately some of these sites are being destroyed because of lack of recognition. I place the blame because we're trying to save them, but mainstream should be, someday they'll be blamed for it, rightfully so, for the ones that say these things aren't worth saving and it's a distraction to real archaeology. But I have questions just like you do, Mark. These things built in a similar time period by the same people, or are they built in different time periods by the same, generationally by the same descendants or whatever, or is it different people building them? Dr. Winkler thought that there was a Celtic period, and before that, Native Americans were involved, I think, although there may have been some Europeans, and then earlier in time, it was an earlier group, like the Phoenicians, according to him, and, I'm sure that will raise a lot of ruckus, but that was kind of what he said over stages 1, 2, and 3, So he comes up with 3 periods that our site was being used and built, But I think Osl will help to show that, I mean, if we could do more of the structures, too, in the walls, boy, wouldn't that be something? We have thousands and thousands of feet of walls, and if we could get out there and date these walls, and even historic ones, to separate them from perhaps the prehistoric ones. And then you get a place like North Stonington, Connecticut, with 400 serpent walls. And they're using photogrammetry, too. And I think I might have sent you a couple images of the 3D photogrammetry. And you look at some of the walls and like, yeah, that's unmistakable. That's definitely a serpent. That is a serpent wall. The head, the twisting body, and then the tail, and it's just like, and it's all in 3D. On a computer, you can manipulate it the way you want. You can look underneath it, above it. And you look at it like, that is the craziest looking, thing I've ever seen. It looks just like a snake, It isn't a farmer's wall, so, it's not a mistake. You may want to confuse a stone chamber with a root cellar. You can try to do that, but a serpentine wall would serve no purpose for a farm or a farmer. So.
Right. You get. I think tonight, the more questions we've asked, we've generated more questions. I think that's actually a good thing.
Yeah.
It gives you maybe a new angle to investigate. But I think I think that's just why your property was Mystery Hill.
Yeah, that's very appropriate. Yeah, and the name of the hill is still Mystery Hill for sure. And it does raise a lot of questions. People come up. Most of our visitors are, open-minded enough to consider that the site may be ancient. So don't have your mind too open. Your brain will fall, or too closed, it will suffocate. So something in the middle. And most people are really respectful. And then once you start to see some of the features up there, like, yeah, this is not a farm. It doesn't look like a farm. It doesn't look like a shoe shop or a shoe factory, or a cider press, or a cider mill, or a soap making factory. Because they blame the table on being a cider press or a limestone for making soap. This 9,000-pound table with the oracle chamber and everything else around it. You start looking at the trapezoid shapes, the core belling, the carbon dating. And that's the thing that gets me, all these different features that we have, all these pieces of evidence, you can actually see, touch, you can measure, you can come up, and these sites around the Northeast and elsewhere are being ignored, and ridiculed to somewhat, not as much as they used to be. But there is a gentleman from Washington who is part of the National Register of Historic Places. He's retired, and he's working with Mira and another gentleman right now, I think, about the Serpentine Walls across the nation. Because what I mentioned about the Serpentine Walls, you can't confuse them with the farmers, an agricultural wall. And I believe Barbara did a wonderful thing about the New England walls, something like 240,000 miles of walls. But she did a wonderful job on that. And some people should see that video and what she said about it. It's really good. But these walls don't look like farmers' walls. They have slabs of stone in them that we call orthostats. They have niches made out of like lintled stone structures. We have the windows. Some windows have louvers in them, stone louvers. And then you have the monoliths, that are aligned astronomically. We've been told that our astronomical alignments are coincidental. 51 coincidences of these stones that were taken out the bedrock, shaped, many of them shaped like an arrowhead, if you will, and then lined up. And they work about 1800 BC. That's a hell of a coincidence,
Yeah, it's a pattern, not a coincidence.
Yeah, it's a pattern. Yeah, when you start to see patterns, it's not exactly. And then you get the patterns of the Serpentine Walls, and then you have the window patterns too that are, a lot of them are in Serpentine Walls, like the ones in the Berkshires and in Connecticut, and then they're in Pennsylvania. Yeah, I mean, it's like something that a farmer, because the guy that was up there was a shoemaker, 5th generation, and he had some domesticated animals. Why would they ever do anything like that in the world? So if the old SL stuff comes back and says Patty built this, it's going to be a lot of explaining, no matter what it is, whatever the dates come back, if they're not contaminated, there'll still have to be a lot of explaining to do, how the process was done, what it means, and then how do we promote that, especially if it agrees with some of the carbon datings, the really old carbon datings. So I think probably sometime in late summer, around, or September 11th, so sometime hopefully around that time period, we should start to see the results come back, and that will be a radio show probably, depending on what comes out of it.
Just let me know. We'll schedule you for that one.
Yeah, we're on pins and needles waiting for the results right now, but it's going to be a while. So, and the other sites in New England too, it'll be so fascinating to see how the other I believe there are 4 other places tested. I think it's pretty expensive. I think it was over $20,000 just spent on the testing. I think so. And the price is coming down like anything. Technological. It will get a little bit less expensive, and maybe more places can. And maybe there'll be funding too. If there's an interest, if these dates come back and show these sites were here in ancient times, maybe some universities or organizations will say, "Hey, look, this is really interesting data, and it supports an ancient time period, not some colonial thing, That's what these people have been saying. Maybe it will. We don't know. I don't want to jump the gun on that.
But, we're down about 8 minutes or so, and one thing. I wanted to address as we wind up the show was when you were a guest with Jeffrey Wilson a couple of years ago. He discussed the ceremonial sites in Ohio that were built near the edge of a glacial ice sheet. For example, there's Fort Hill, which is just north of the Serpent Mounds. Many of the Chillicothe necropolises are built on tectonic plates. Serpent Mound inside a meteor crater and this one article or this one book, Meadowcroft, does talk about the pre-Pleistocene topography and drainage of the Appalachian Plateau was significantly different from that seen today. Topographic relief was lower and drainage flowed north and northwest to basins which later would be occupied by the Great Lakes. The present Ohio River did not exist. Rather, 2 main river systems drained the plateau. The Taze-Mahomet River flowed from the Piedmont area of Virginia to West Virginia, and then northwest into central Ohio, Indiana, and Illinois, etc. But so many of these ceremonial sites are built near some kind of unusual natural feature from millions of years ago. It's really interesting that the native peoples and people, coming from Mexico to the place, Poverty Point, and very possibly to your place, they seem to gravitate towards building their ceremonial centers near these natural features. I think we lost that ability for some reason. What are some is like the Clinton-Newberry fault line probably a main reason why the hill was chosen as a ceremonial activity versus one hill couple miles down the road?
Yeah, I mean the water bodies go by here. The 2 ancient Native American trails do, and the Clinton-Newberry, one of the branches comes right through the hill. And I think we talked about some of the about 700 or 800 stone circles that are in Wales going into England, how they're located on or within about 1.5 miles of a fault line. And the ones in Scotland, number about the same. I've been up there, and I've been to Wales too. But I don't know if they're on fault lines, but it seems like that's true, you know, that these fault lines seem to be something that was attractive to these people. And you're right, they could have chosen another hill around here. And astronomically, however, the hill is 365 feet above sea level. There are a couple of hills around here that are a little bit higher. And they have if you look at our survey work that was done in the 70s, you know, and 80s too, they continued it after 77. We did more survey work. But the horizon around here is just a little bit higher, about a half a degree higher because of these hills. And that might be one reason they chose the hill, because astronomically, these hills have notches, you know, where they go up and down. It's kind of like the back of a serpent too. And those little dips in the little peaks were actually chosen to align the alignments with. Oh, they worked nicely. And so like the summer solstice sunrise, you know, it has kind of a notched top. You've done a whole story about the notches, you know, and like some of the ones in calendars. Well, actually, because if you look at the horizon, and we opened that up in, I think 73, we opened the summer solstice sunrise, and the horizon has that notch, the same shape as a stone. So actually they shaped the stone to fit the notch. So you look at the stone as a foresight, and then you look in the distance, you'll see the sun rising on the notch, you know, 4 or 5 miles away, and they both fit together. And the sun rises 90 degrees to the slope of the stone and that notch. So they might have chose the hill because of the astronomy. And I think probably that, you know, that fault line, because that seems to be something that attracted these people. And the hill was, you know, bare. The other hills probably were bare back then too. And this is located right on both sides of water. So that may have been part of the attractions to the site, because like I say, they could have built on the next hill over, Hog Hill or Providence Hill or Spigot Hill or something like that, but they chose this hill. And that's a great question too. But I think it might be because of those reasons. Astronomically, they had the water and also the fault line. Those other hills may or may not have a fault in them, and I'm not aware of any. I haven't heard about that. That would be kind of interesting to find out too, you know, because the fault would have been very easily to see without the soil being on the hilltop. It would have been pretty bare, you know. So those are great questions. And then Jeff has been to our site. So I remember that discussion we talked about the Serpentine Walls, and where he said, do you think they're earlier or later, you know? Because at the time he visited, we weren't aware of these Serpentine Walls. And he's at the Great Serpent Mound, you know. So that was something I think he was kind of interested in, you know. So in that way, they are similar to the Great Serpent Mound, except ours are made out of stone and those are made out of earth, although the foundation, I think, is stone at the Great Serpent Mound, if I'm not mistaken, has a stone foundation. But still, it's all really, really interesting. It could be Draco, you know, the constellation. And so, yeah, Jeff's been to our place. He'll have to come back and check us out again, you know.
Yeah, Jeff's a really good researcher. Okay, hey, Dennis, we're down to just under 2 minutes. Do you want to give out the website and anything about Monday's ceremonies, and then we can wrap up the show?
Thank you and Barbara for having me on. Again, I really, really enjoyed it. And thank the audience for listening. And so we have a website. It's StonehengeUSA.com. And they can either, on there is a phone number, and also our email, which is info@StonehengeUSA.com. But StonehengeUSA.com is our website. And on that, you can actually look at a 12-minute video that's in our theater. Our visitor center is closed, but we're still open right now. We're doing everything outdoors. They also have a free app download. It has all the different structures on the main site and on the way up and back. So you can do a virtual tour of our site in your, on your Easy Boy chair if you want, or couch at home. You can do a complete tour, and it can be used when you come to visit us too. You can actually take it. It will talk to you. It has pictures and text. That's on the website. And on Monday we'll be open for the sunset and I guess the sunrise, although it's going to be cloudy. So that probably, and that stone monolith has fallen, the one for the sunrise. So it's not as visual as like the summer solstice sunrise, with the stone still standing. But the sunset will be there to watch that. And the 50th anniversary, and then we'll watch the Grand Conjunction. And if anybody wants to get a hold of us again, they can just go on the website, and you can get our phone or our email. And we're going to be on a Travel Channel show coming up, and we're in negotiations right now for a Science Channel. They're both part of the Discovery Network. That will be coming up. So we got things going on like that.
All right. All right, we're just about out of time. Thank you, Dennis. Merry Christmas. Good night, everybody.
You too.